Hello everyone, welcome to this week's Product School webinar. Thanks for joining us today. Just in case you didn't know, Product School offers product management certificates online and at our 20 campuses worldwide. On top of that, every week we offer some amazing local product management events and host online webinars, live streams, and Ask Me Anything sessions. Head over to productschool.com after this webinar to check them out. Today, we have an awesome guest presenting. I'd like to introduce you to Jeremy Sainz. Jeremy is a former engineer turned to product. He has years of extensive experience in multiple disciplines such as engineering, UI, UX design, and project management, along with designing software in multiple industries and business models. He is currently Vice President of Product at Kajabi, at their location in Orange County, California, where he helps to create software that helps companies run their entire information business. Today, Jeremy is helping manage the primary product team for a bootstrapped software as a service that empowers people to share their knowledge online and profit. Feel free to leave questions for Jeremy in the comments and we will address them at the end. Without further ado, let's welcome Jeremy. Thanks for joining us today. Feel free to start, Jeremy.
All right. Hey, thanks for having me. Let me get my slides up really quick, and then we can get this started. So I'm going to share my screen, and here we go. Okay, so like was introduced, my name's Jeremy, and I work on a project called a product called Kajabi, and I'm going to be talking a little bit about how we perform continuous discovery inside of our teams, and kind of the ways that we tend looking at shaping our product and shaping our roadmap, and the ways that we really try to get down to discovering what are the things that our customers, what are the problems that our customers need to be solved, and what are the best ways for us to solve them. So. But first, I want to start with a little bit of a story. This is typically a startup PM's origin story. If you talk to any people who have been or have started their product management journey inside of a startup, you'll probably hear a story very, very similar to this one. And so basically it's this: your company's growing, but you start to see gaps in the process around how your features are deployed and how you're delivering value to customers. And you're starting to see that there's a lot of cracks in the process, and you really need to start tightening those up. And so you read up and you discover there's this whole field called product management, and essentially lives and breathes how products come to life, how they launch, and how they exist, and how they go to market. So you go to your CEO and you beg that you have somebody manage the product that isn't the CEO of the company, because the CEO, I mean, the team's growing, the company's growing, the CEO possibly can't manage the product and run the company at the same time. So CEO tells you that they will think about it and they'll get back to you. Maybe we'll hire some cool product manager person, something like that. So 2 weeks later, you're called into the CEO's office and he gives you the glorious title of product manager, and you might not have asked for that. But reluctantly, you said, okay, I'll give it a shot. How hard could it be, right? So now you're at a loss because you now have to figure out how to be a product manager without anybody telling you how to be a product manager. And this is exactly how I got my start in product management. A big part of my journey was really figuring out how, first of all, what in the world I was doing, and then how to make the product succeed. So naturally, I went to a website, you may have heard of it, called Google. And I kind of tried to ask, what does a product manager actually do? And so these are some of the words that show up when you search product manager. I mean, you first of all, you get images like this. You see product, growth, development, analysis, worker. So yeah, boss. There's basically what I've come to discover is that there's a lot of ambiguity in the role of product management. And that kind of can create a problem when you're really trying to learn from the ground floor what product management is and where you can really deliver value to the customers. You also find resources like this, which this is a pretty good one. You kind of have this UX tech business. You've probably seen this already, where you kind of are the intersection of a lot of these different disciplines. So that one's all right. And then you read up and you say, wait, am I some sort of mini CEO of the product? That's also weird. So you kind of walk away a little bit more confused than you were starting out. You thought this was going to be, how hard could it be? I'm going to be managing a product, figuring out, what kind of ideas are going to be good ones and which ones are going to be bad ones. But it turns out there's a lot more that goes into this. So I was really, really confused, very, very stressed out. But a few years later, getting myself up on my feet, I realized that I've learned a lot over the last few years. And we're still trying to figure out what a lot of this looks like, because product management, especially at a company that's growing so quickly, it can always be a moving target, and figuring out how to triage and work through, some of those growing and scaling issues can always be challenging. But looking back over those last few years, I realized some of my challenges were I was really trying to take a prescriptive approach to product management, where I was just trying to do everything by the book. And I was really terrified of doing anything kind of wrong or failing or learning on the job by failing. I think those are some of the things that I look back at and say, well, maybe I was trying too hard to not do things wrong, that I wasn't able to explore what are the things that are going to bring more value to the company. So after a few years of growing and growing the team and figuring out how we do product management here at Kajabi, it's not perfect, but it's certainly better. And one of the things that really sticks out to me in these past few years of trying to prescribe some sort of framework or by the books methodology is really as product people. And if you're hiring really talented people, you don't really need a framework to tell you how to do products. Usually it's too rigid, and your culture of your company can change as the company grows, and too rigid of a process won't scale with the needs that your customers have, with the needs that your business has as you grow. So we found out that really what we needed good tools, good things that we could pull out of our tool belt and use at any given time, whether that's a customer interview or whether that's a framing process, things like that. We needed good tools, things that we could pull out. And we also needed good habits. And those habits are there to reinforce the usage of those tools and keep us focused on this more holistic product process. So what I'm going to be talking about today are the 5 habits for continuous discovery. And this is kind of like an anti-framework. I want to try to push away from this idea that we need this prescriptive approach to product management, and more that we need to be focusing on, are we focusing on these habits as we go throughout our weeks? Are we talking about them and using this similar vocabulary? So an overview of the 5 habits. Habit number 1 is framing. Habit number 2 is ideation. 3 is validation, 4 is execution, and 5 is iteration. And it's my belief that we need to be doing all of these things all at the same time. It's kind of this interspersed flywheel where all of them kind of start complementing each other. So let's go over this habit of framing. Framing at its core is discovering, understanding, and falling in love with your customer's problem. And it's generally centered around a business objective. Being able to synthesize these two things is a really important skill a product manager needs to have. And it's a process to try to find out and discover, okay, how can I take my customers' problems, solve them well enough in a way where it's going to be benefiting the business? And so some ways that you can start, some really practical ways that you could start doing this framing exercise. Again, I'm going to point out some examples of tools, but there's so many tools that you can use around framing. But what I really want to talk about as far as a focus around this habit is finding the right people and just start talking to them. This is a really, really, really underrated thing. Going out and speaking with your customers, living and breathing their lives in a lot of ways can really, really help. So an example of kind of this synthesis of business objectives and customer problems to be solved. Your boss comes to you and says, we need to decrease churn by 10%. Well, simply, one way to frame this is you go find churn customers and you find out why they churn. That sounds really simple, but actually going through the steps to do this is a really, really important process. So you can use a tool. This is a screenshot of Pendo where we can look at our canceled customers in the last 30 days, and I can go send them an email and say, hey, I'd like to talk. This is an example of an email that I shoot out to our customers once who've churned. So, hey, I wanted to reach out and say, thanks for giving Kajabi a shot. We care deeply about making our customers successful, and we want to know where we fell short. And I kind of give them a link over to my one-on-one page so they know that, there's a real human being here on the other line, and somebody who is high up in the company who would love to talk with them. And we follow up on this, and we book a lot of calls. I'd say we talk with customers every single day, if not, probably 3 to 4 times a week. Another example, increase adoption of a feature by 17%. Ask generally engaged customers what's holding them back from adoption. So we use, again, a tool like Pendo. There's a ton of other tools around user behavior and analytics, but you can start segmenting your customers in these groups of, these are my generally engaged customers, people who log onto the app 15 out of 30 every 30 days. And, none of them are using this feature, or a good chunk of them are not using this feature. Let's find out why not. One other example, increase CSAT with a particular feature. We like running a CSAT survey. You can use a lot of tools to run surveys inside of your application or outside of your application. But make sure to talk about a very specific part of your application or tool set, not just the broad aspects. So how would you rate the email marketing features at Kajabi? Give us a 1 through 5. Not only will you have kind of the quantitative data, but you also want to ask qualitatively. And you don't want to stop there. These are just indicators around people who may be good candidates to talk to, because at the end of the day, we can't hide behind screens and metrics. We need to go out and we need to talk with customers. We need to really get down to the brass tacks of why they may be choosing not to use a feature, because there's a multitude of and a myriad of ways that can be holding them back, and some interesting trends that we would never get by just collecting them in a survey. So the TLDR around this is talk to your customers. Find ways to ruthlessly prioritize talking to your customers at least weekly, and find ways to frame, to exert this habit of framing problems and learning more and more about why your customers struggle with it. So that's habit number 1. Habit number 2 is ideation. This goes off the premise that you are not the idea person. I used to think going into product management, I'm the idea person. I come up with the ideas and the developers build it. That's not really the case. You are not the idea person. Ideas come from everywhere. They come from you or your team. They come from your customers, stakeholders, other departments. So it's really, really important that we figure out a really good way to collect all of these ideas, because they're going to come in large volumes, and we need to figure out how to manage these ideas well and not commit to building any of them, but using them as indicators and ways to form into solutions. So ideas are also cheap. We can't get hung up on our idea because we think it's the coolest. It's in the same way, even if we agree as a team that some ideas are cool, so we need to go through and make sure that idea is actually going to work. So the goal here is that we get ideas in, as many as we can, even the bad ones, even the ones that just sound crazy, and we want to get solutions out. And so collect all of the feedback around your product, all the ideas, and put them in what I'd call a feedback management system. There's a couple out there where you can collect a lot of ideas and categorize them and organize them. And as you scale, you're going to find out that you have a lot of different needs for what it means to collect ideas. And realize that you aren't putting ideas into a backlog like you're going to be building all of these. These ideas and these feedback is literally just indicators of how people are thinking about the problem. So it's worth having a holistic picture of how your customers think about a particular problem, how your stakeholders or your bosses or CEO thinks about the particular problem, how your customer support people think about the particular problem. And this helps you form a more holistic view. So when you sit down to help solve the problem, you're taking a lot of those thoughts into account. And you may not be just pulling an idea off the shelf and saying, we're going to build this one's the best, but rather you're going to be brainstorming with your product team to figure out the best solution based on all of the feedback. Another thing that I love to do is, as you're collecting a lot of feedback from customers, it can be really hard to kind of manage expectations that, like, you're just a feature factory and that customers are going to submit feature requests and you're going to build it someday. And so I like writing a really good product feedback policy, basically a document that's for your team internally and for your customers externally to read and know exactly what you do with feedback and how it's valuable to you, and pretty much how you're not going to just take all feedback and put it into your application or your product, because that would make an entirely big mess. So that is habit number 2, ideation. Now, what do we do with these solutions that we come up with as a team? We can't just put them in the app yet because, we think they're good or we think that we understand the problem well. We actually need to validate that our hypotheses are correct, right? So we like to do validation here in Kajabi by essentially our outcome here around validation is to mitigate risk, mitigate development risk, money, time, effort, opportunity cost by saying, hey, our team's going to be working on this thing for a month. That's going to take us a month away from something else that might be more valuable. And so we want to go through this exercise of answering 4 questions to help mitigate risk. The 4 questions are, is this solution valuable to the customer? Like, will the customer buy it if it's something we sell to them? If it's something we're adding on to our product, is it something that they'll choose to use because they get value out of it? Even if it is valuable to the customer, if they choose to use it or buy it, will they actually be able to use it? This one goes underrated a lot in usability. Like, we'll build a solution that may be valuable, but it could be so complicated to actually use that people will just kind of shy away from it. Thirdly, is it feasible? Is it something that our development team can actually build in a reasonable amount of time? It fits in with our architecture. It's very much worth evaluating. And then lastly, is it viable? Is it something that is going to be in line with our company culture, our company values? Is it something that our company can support from other departments and things like that? That's also worth going over and making sure that it's in line with our company vision. So where do you start with validating some of these solutions? Well, I like to start by finding out the quickest and cheapest way to learn. Because we could obviously go the MVP route, and everybody has a different idea of what a minimum viable product is. But a lot of people think, well, maybe we just have to build a minimum viable product and then find out if that is valuable, usable, feasible, viable. And that's usually a very expensive way to go about it, is bringing in all your developers and building a huge prototype and code and having months and months before we find out this thing actually doesn't work. So I like to do a couple different things to kind of validate these 4 risks very quickly. So valuable, you can book interviews with your customers. Again, you're going to see a lot of trends from me is you derive a lot of value out of talking with your customers. Desirability interviews, find out ways to kind of prototype this. A prototype can be anything from just a spoken description of what this thing does to a very high-end clickable prototype in design. But you don't have to always have a clickable prototype. Sometimes just pitching like an elevator pitch to a customer can be some good ways to evaluate how valuable something is. So desirability interviews is something we do a lot of here at Kajabi. We have ideas, or we have solutions that we put together, and we just start chatting with customers about it and seeing how that would impact their lives, what adoption would look like, what switching costs would look like, things like that. We use a tool called Pendo Feedback as well to kind of as our kind of feedback management system. There's a lot of feedback management systems, but we use this one in particular, and it's a good way, to kind of gauge demand of a certain feature. You can use a tool like User Voice as well for people to kind of vote up, hey, this is a particular feature I want. And again, you're not going to commit to building that feature, and make sure you manage those expectations, but it shows an indicator that there's a desire for a certain problem to be solved by a segment of your customers. And so if you look by popularity, it might show that there's something valuable in that problem, and it's worth working back and looking at some of the better solutions and testing value of those. Usability. Book usability tests with the right people. This is really important because usability can be all over the place, and especially if you have a fairly broad market in your customer base, it's really important that if you're looking at a solution that you really narrow down who is this solution for, and finding those types of people that are willing to do some usability tests on it. I've seen a lot of usability tests really flounder and fail in a lot of ways because they've just not selected the right candidates. And so make sure that you talk with your team about finding who this right candidate is and what that means for you and your team, and focus on making sure you bring in just the correct people to test with. And again, prototype can be anything from an elevator pitch to a full-fledged, actually coded up prototype inside of your application. And it's that and everything in between. And so make sure you pick the right fidelity for what kind of prototype you want to find, and focus on what exactly you want to accomplish in the usability test. All right, is it feasible? We talk with our tech lead on our team. We figure out if they need to dig into anything. Give them time to assess feasibility. Don't just demand that they have a yes or no on this. Make sure they have time and room to go back to the code to look at what it would take to build something like this. At the same time, they're probably going to be factoring in effort a little bit into this feasibility. And that's a good conversation to start having, is estimates around effort. Not that you would demand it, but that it would kind of play into how we prioritize later. And so talk with your tech lead and get a better idea of what it would take to make this, and kind of get their personal take on it. Does this fit in with the architecture? Is it even, worthwhile doing if this is going to take 6 months versus this other equally valuable feature over here that's going to take 3 days? All right, and lastly, is it viable? Do we have buy-in from leadership and our other departments, our bosses? Is it aligned with our values? This is where it gets really good to start pitching opportunities to some other key stakeholders in the company and getting their take on it, and making sure that there's no red flags that kind of pop up, like, oh no, don't put that feature in, that's going to swamp the support team. That's worth another conversation. And it's why we go through some of these 4 risks. So again, we like to use we use Pendo a lot, but they have a feature called Guides that are kind of these pop-ups and surveys and things like that. You can use all kinds of other software to do this, but we do this to also validate big ideas that we may have that, we might not be interested in building at the time, but we use it to kind of get a quick turnaround, because one of our product designers or product managers can just put together a little pop-up very quickly and easily and validate a certain idea. And we can actually validate it to a certain segment of the customer base. So it's really cool to run experiments that way. Cool. So habit number 4 is around execution. I know I have just a few minutes left. I promise we don't have very many slides left, so I think we'll be good for answering some questions toward the end. But execution here is really just around shipping. And a lot of people think this is just about delivery, and we can get into and talk about agile and everything like that, but it really isn't. Execution is a little bit more holistic. It's around it's really about helping define the scope of your work, how your team dynamic works together, and also how we communicate that. So I really like to prescribe to this whole, we need to ship and learn weekly as a team. So as these kind of product teams, you need to make sure you're really defining, hey, what's our outcome that we want to present on a weekly basis. And I'm not just talking about agile sprints. I'm talking about, as a team, as a product team, are there things that we want to ship or things that we want to learn about our customers, about the problem weekly? And I like going through a commit and celebrate kind of routine here, where on Monday mornings our team sits down and we can look at committing for the scope of work that we want to ship or that we want to learn weekly. And Friday is all about celebration, about demoing some of the cool things that we've done, or sharing our learnings that we had with our customers through interviews and through trying to validate some more of these ideas. So execution is how your team kind of moves week to week throughout that. And that's how teams kind of can inch toward accomplishing some really big things. And lastly, communicate. We're doing a ton of work on all of our product teams, and it's worth communicating with all of the other departments, all of the other teams who are going to be affected by this. This includes customer support, whoever's authoring your help site, whether that's you or another team, communicating with marketing, making sure that the features or the value that you're bringing to your customers is something that is factored into the marketing message, there's strategy behind product marketing, making sure that you communicate with your customers. So you're as transparent as possible about how you guys formulate your roadmap, what you decide to work on, what you decide not to work on, and making sure that you get a constant momentum with your customers, because that helps earn trust in the team. And what we've seen is our customers are just now rabid fans of the application. They're rabid fans of our team, and they trust us to solve their problems. And that's really the place that you want to get in, but it takes a lot of communication to get there. I like to communicate inside of our product a lot too. I know there's, again, a ton of applications to do this. We use Pendo, but we try to get features early into beta so we can get customer feedback very quickly. We can talk about this more on our last habit, but I like to talk about how when we bring things into beta, to really just be transparent with customers. Hey, there's a beta feature. Thanks for exploring it. Here, why don't you try it out? And we do this a lot with how we release our features and talk about them. Okay, so habit 5. After we've done all of these other habits, there's this really special habit called iteration. And it's really about regularly circling back on what we've shipped. An example that I want to point out, so in our application in Kajabi, we ship this thing called pipelines, which is basically this big funnel builder that puts all of many of the components that we have inside of our system and kind of gives you a top level overview. And we really didn't have, we didn't scope enough time to really deliver exactly what we wanted, but we also wanted to get it into customers' hands first and foremost, so we can get better feedback than trying to just iterate for 6 months and make it perfect. So we busted this out in a month, and it worked okay. The functionality was really great, and people were able to build, funnels and see kind of from a top level overview what that would look like. But it wasn't until 2018 where we really started collecting feedback, and we iterated on a second version of this. And it was, about, probably 8 months of collecting feedback before we were really able to find out what were the points of friction that this current system had, and how could we make it better. And we made it a lot better. This customer satisfaction ranking went way up, and we got a lot more adoption by iterating on figuring out exactly, what the pain points our customers were having and why, and addressing those little by little. And so we were able to deliver a solution that is just far superior, that has a much higher adoption rating and a much higher engagement rating. So in that line, continue to measure CSAT like we were when we were doing pipelines. See where the customer satisfaction is, set goals to figure out how you can get customer satisfaction better through iteration. Relentlessly pursue capturing value. It's going to take a few iterations at least to make sure that your idea or that your solution is going to be the right one and in its right place. And lastly, give your customers superpowers. Figure out how you can make them feel powerful and empowered to do really good work on any of the products that you're working on. So just to cover, once again, the 5 habits are framing, really understanding the problem; ideation, figuring out where and how you collect ideas and how those turn into solutions; validation, that's how you take these solutions and make sure they're actually the right ones, that they're going to work. 4 is execution, which is on delivering on those solutions and making sure you communicate them. And iteration is making sure that this solution that you've delivered and communicated is going to be constantly worked on and constantly improved until it really hits that sweet spot of delivering value. So I know that felt like a lot, but the day-to-day product management can be ambiguous and overwhelming a lot. So my encouragement is take a step back and look at this big picture, less of all the tools and tips and tricks of how you can do things, and look at these 5 habits, because I think if more teams adopt these 5 habits and really focus on exercising them like a muscle, we'll cultivate stronger product teams that focus on the success of their customer and how that aligns with the success of the business. And we won't have to have a stringent process around it. So with these regular rhythms, I think we can really transcend any sort of market, any sort of organization, any sort of framework with these 5 habits. So these are my 5 habits for continuous discovery. Thank you.
Great, Jeremy. It's been a fantastic presentation. So before you leave, I have 2 questions for you. We've been asking this question to different PMs. I would love it because the answers are very different. So what would you recommend to PMs that are starting in this world to do in their first 30 days?
Cool. So starting the work in their first 30 days, I would say really focus on how you can develop some habits and practices around really understanding the problem, because I think that's a really needed it's a really needed skill set in this kind of product management community right now. We still have a lot of companies that are still trying to transition into this kind of continuous discovery rhythm and process. There's still a lot of product managers that are just focused on kind of this execution and iteration step. And so if you could really nail down these first 3 habits and really kind of get started on focusing on what that means and realizing that there's a bulk of your time that 1 through 3 take up, that's really going to counteract any job that you may get into in the future the culture is really going to try to push you to only do 4 and 5. 1 through 3 is really, really important though, because if you're only doing 4 and 5, you're going to be churning out a lot of, productivity, but any sort of product updates or features or enhancements that you're delivering aren't guaranteed to really make an impact on your customer, and they're going to have a far less likelihood of making an impact on the business. And so I'd say focusing on 1 to 3 to kind of counteract our current culture of focusing on too much on 4 and 5, I would say would be a good thing to start looking into.
Perfect. And the final question is, do you have any final advice for aspiring product managers?
Final advice for aspiring product managers, figure out how you can obsess over a particular customer or niche. Be interested in talking with people and their problems, and even more so than being excited about solving them, be excited about learning about them, because there's a lot of problems out there, and there's a lot of solutions out there for problems that may not exist or may not be as important. But if you can learn to be obsessed about a problem, I think that's going to go a really long way in as far as empathy and as far as driving forward products that really focus on solving pain points, problems, and bringing new opportunities to the market.
Great, Jeremy. So thanks so much for presenting today. And thanks everyone who joined us. Before we leave, remember that we offer weekly online and on-site events in more than 100 cities. And also you can find us at social media at Product School, and be sure to keep up with the latest product management content at productschool.com/blog. Thank you all for joining. Enjoy the rest of your day, and I hope to see you next week. Thank you, Jeremy.
Thanks.